The 575th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Good! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! Got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson. And he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark. And this year, the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you on a Tuesday night, late on a Tuesday night, but that's because about an hour or so, the good people over at Inside Carolina reported some news around the status of incoming Montenegro professional player Luka Bogavac and his UNC status for the upcoming season. And we're here to talk about that because he cleared a massive hurdle and he's one step closer to being deemed eligible for Carolina ahead of the upcoming season. We'll talk about that. We'll also give some thoughts on a national topic around college basketball, one that I know I'm very passionate about. I imagine Anthony is as well, which is NCAA Tournament expansion, which was officially put on hold for the upcoming tournament. They'll revisit this sometime later for maybe the 2027-2028 NCAA tournament. We'll talk about that before we get out of here, just to kind of bookend the back end of the show. We start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to Bruce Lee for today's pod thought, and that thought is, quote, "If you always put limits on everything you do, physical or anything else, it will spread into your work and into your life. There are no limits. There are only plateaus, and you must not stay there. You must go beyond them," end quote. I think this is a really good quote for where Carolina is at right now because, it feels like there have been certain times under Hubert Davis, there have been limits on what Carolina could achieve on and off the basketball court, whether it was because of a lack of NIL funding, whether it was from poor roster construction. It hasn't felt like in all of his 4 years that the sky was the limit for Carolina and that they could reach the Final Four, cut down the nets, and win a national championship. And if there is a plateau that exists for this program, that is the plateau. That is the expectation. That's the standard, and that's the demand. And look, Hubert Davis knows that. He knew what he was signing up for when he got hired as Carolina's head coach upon the retirement of Roy Williams. I think he could look at what he's done and defend what he's done, but I bet you if he was being honest with himself, he would tell you he has not met the standard set upon him since, he took over and has been the steward of this program for the last 4 years. That's why we enter this year with the belief that it's a make or break year for him if he wants to be on the sidelines for the foreseeable future. And hopefully this year, not only does, Hubert Davis meet the limit, but he exceeds and goes beyond the limits because if not, it very well could cost him his job.
Yeah, I mean, I think the plateau for this basketball program is probably the Final Four. I mean, maybe a national championship is a little too aggressive, but I do believe that that is a plateau that Carolina can reach under Hubert Davis. They've done it before. They've reached the final night of the season under him, and I think that was not a fluke. I think that was a guy that was really showing you some of his coaching prowess. And unfortunately, since that point, it just really hasn't shown through. I believe, though, that this season you will be able to see that. I mean, Carolina has completely overhauled this roster. I believe that this is going to be a group that can get back to at least where they were in 23-24, where going into the year, you felt like Carolina had a chance to be very competitive. We saw it play out throughout the entire season. And really, Carolina showed that they were one of the better teams in the entire country for most of the year until they got to the NCAA tournament, and they ultimately fall short to Alabama, a team that has been a thorn in their side and really isn't going to go away for a while now because of how good Nate Oates has been there so far. So, I mean, look, I think this is one of those areas that, Hubert Davis, he's got to take this one to heart if he's hearing this edition of the podcast and be able to rise above, some of the limitations that your team is going to present you. There are going to be limitations with this team. We know it. There's ones with just about every team that's out there outside of maybe that 82 title team and that 09 title team. Those teams felt like they could do just about anything on any given night, and it wouldn't really matter who the opponent was. These teams, I don't know if they're necessarily that good, and I don't know if this year's team is going to be in that category as well, but I do believe that he is going to be able to hopefully rise above expectations for them. And again, we've talked about it so much this offseason. If you are a Carolina fan, you should be rooting for that. You should be hoping that that happens because there are not many other great options out there to take over this program without having to go, with the option of going outside the family. And even then, if you go outside the family and hire somebody, who's to say it's guaranteed that they're even going to have success here at Carolina because of all the pressure that comes with it. So I'm rooting for Hubert Davis to be able to rise above the plateaus that unfortunately have shown up for Carolina these first few years under him. And I think everybody should be doing the same.
You mentioned that this is a revamped roster, and I think with the way that this roster is constructed, I think Luka Bogavac was the most important get they got this offseason because he was the perimeter scorer that this roster did not have, when we were sitting here in mid to late May. They did a great job, bringing guys in the backcourt. Guys know how I feel about Kyan Evans. Jaden Young, I think, was a nice, depth piece that can really round out the backcourt. You reshape the front court with Henry Vassar. The Arizona transfer, Jaron Stevenson, arrives in Chapel Hill. You got Jonathan Powell, who is going to maybe be the best shooter on the roster, but you needed something outside of just a shooter. And then that's what you get in the form of Luka Bogavac, who we've talked a lot about. So no reason to kind of rehash kind of who he is as a player and what he's bringing. But, whenever you go the international route, and this is something that Carolina is going to do a lot more moving forward, there are always hurdles that come with it, just in terms of getting them over here and getting them cleared to play. So when Carolina decided to go after him, these hurdles were not a surprise. This was something that they knew upon the recruitment they would have to go through. It was just kind of going to be a check-by-check point of getting him closer and closer to get here. I think in a perfect world, he would have been here a lot sooner. You got to remember he did not commit to Carolina. I believe it was the end of May when he joined the program, and maybe there was some stuff he'd already planned overseas for his summer with his basketball season coming to an end. But with the new schedule where you can practice in June and July, you have the annual beach trip, which is where this team and this program really they try to force chemistry because of how the roster overturns. You would have loved to have him here for those incidents, but that was not the case. Still, the most important deadline was having him, enrolled in classes and be ready to go when the fall semester begins, 13 days from now. And that's what they were able to do today. He's been granted his student visa. and is expected to be in Chapel Hill sometime next week. This follows a deadline or a data point where he cleared UNC admissions back in early July. He had an interview with officials at the U.S. Embassy in Montenegro last week. And so now that he has now been granted his student visa, the final thing for him to do is to be cleared by the NCAA. The important thing to note here is with all that stuff already done, we know the NCAA can be a headache. We see how they kind of drag things out. But this was maybe the biggest hurdle yet to kind of climb in terms of just getting him the student visa. The expectation is that he'll be a student in 13 days. And more importantly, when this team opens practice, and they open practice, believe it or not, in just over 6 weeks, he'll be able to be on the court, a full participant ahead of the 2025-2026 season.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that everything that you said right there is 100% right about him being, getting over the biggest hurdle, because no matter where you stand politically, you know that this was going to be more difficult during this presidency than in other presidencies because of the immigration policies and everything like that. So you knew this was going to be a really tough hurdle, and it was not a guarantee that he was going to be able to clear this. So the fact that he gets over this one, and now all that's left is that he has to clear NCAA, whatever restrictions or anything that they have for him. I think he'll be perfectly fine. I don't think the NCAA is going to have an issue clearing him, but you never really know. We've seen it with the NCAA before, where they have been difficult, really more on the football front for Carolina. You go back to the Tez Walker situation and everything like that. We saw them sort of drag their feet. I'm hoping that they don't end up dragging their feet on this. I think even if they do end up dragging their feet a little bit, he's still going to be able to practice with the team, which is the good news for right now. And the ultimate thing that they need to be able to get him on the court and doing with his teammates is really bonding, playing basketball, learning what, some of his teammates' tendencies are and everything like that. So I think Carolina has got the big stuff out of the way. Now, what is seen as a pretty powerless group in the NCAA, you just have to get past that. And I think they will be able to here relatively soon. This is great news because now Carolina has their guy on the wing that they sorely needed. You talked about it, this probably being the biggest need. I would say probably after point guard. They really needed that point guard this year. And maybe you think that Seth Trimble would have been fine there and that Carolina would have found a way around it. They would have found someone at that two-guard spot and they would have been fine. So maybe this is what you consider the biggest need for Carolina that they were able to get filled. But either way, you're getting a really great player, a guy that can do so much for you on the wing, can create his own basket, really good in transition, a guy that really thrives off of ball screens. So that's something that Carolina really has to be able to do to free him up and allow him to knock down shots. But that's the thing. You're talking about a guy that shoots the ball about as well as anybody in his league this past year, shot the ball well from the outside. His effective field goal percentage was the third best in the entire league that he played in. And if you're wondering what league this is, Johan Behringer, who just got drafted in the first round of the NBA draft, was a part of this league. Now, Behringer is 18 years old. Bogavac, little older, 21. So that's the reason why he probably wasn't as sought after when it came to the NBA draft. But Carolina is getting a guy that would have been drafted in the NBA draft. And I think that's big for them to get on the wing, is that now you've got him, you've got Caleb Wilson, you've got, Seth Trimble. I don't know if Seth Trimble is necessarily an NBA player, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that he could be. I still think if he shows enough this year with the level of defender that he is, he could be an NBA player. That's three guys right there that you're looking at on this roster and saying could be NBA players. And that doesn't even factor in Henry Vasar, who a lot of people believe would have been drafted as well. So, that's four guys that you look at and think are NBA talents on this roster, or at least have the capability of being NBA talents. That's a long way from where Carolina was even this time last year, where we still had questions about this roster at this time last year. It feels like we're in a much better place with this group. both with the talent that they have in the starting lineup and with the depth that they have.
Well, the biggest thing why I put Bogavac ahead of point guard is because if Carolina had to move Seth Trimble to the 1 and or have to start Derek Dixon, I think there would still be a pathway to them having a successful season. Not having a legitimate wing was the nail in the coffin last year because Cade Tyson was just a complete utter bust trying to make the transition from Belmont up to Carolina. And while Jonathan Powell does qualify as a wing, he's going to be put on the floor to do one thing, which is stand behind the three-point line and shoot 37, 38%. And I think he can do that. I think he will do that. But I like that much better coming off the bench as opposed to him maybe being in a starter role where his limitations are going to be exposed. Bogavac is not only bringing – a NBA game to Carolina, but he's bringing NBA size. He's 6'5". He's 200 pounds. He can score the ball in a multitude of different ways. Yes, he's gonna shoot 39% from behind the 3-point line, but there's a mid-range game there as well. And I think more importantly, when you look at what he does as a rebounder, he could be a one-man fast break. And you saw plenty of times where he got the ball and ran 94 feet down the other end and got a layup, a dunk, or drew a foul. Quite frankly, Carolina did not have that a year ago. After having that with Cormac Ryan, with having that with Harrison Ingram, that kind of vanished from last season. And it's a big reason why Carolina's offense, once they really got out of non-conference play, was nowhere near as explosive. Because teams, once they really started taking away R.J. Davis and forcing other guys to beat them, there just weren't enough guys on the roster that can do that. Luka Bogavac, I think, is poised to arrive on UNC's campus, join this program, and lead this team in scoring, or at least be the top 2 scorer. And if he comes here and he averages, 15 points per game and does so on 45% shooting from the field and 40% from 3 and nearly, 90% from the foul line, I think we're going to be very pleased with his game. And I also think you got to look at the fact that he's 21 years old, so he is older. He has played against, pro competition. So you could argue that this will be a step down playing in the ACC, especially this version of the ACC. But the way he ended his season last year, where he scored 19 or more points in 8 of the final ABA games, including a season-high 27 points back on April 25th, the more he plays, the better he gets. And I think this will be a guy that will show steady growth, steady improvement over the marathon season that is the college basketball year. The guy you see in November won't be the guy you see in December, and so on and so forth. And so I think Hubert Davis, Jim Tanner, this coaching staff, they can go to bed and rest a little bit easier at night knowing this guy's here. Because I got asked by our dear buddy Josh Smilo, who we talk pretty frequently during the season, of course, in the off season. When this news got broke down, he goes, "Well, now are you pumped? Are you excited?" Well, I want to clear this up, buddy. I've been very optimistic about this off season from the get go. I've thought Jim Tanner, Hubert Davis did a fantastic job revamping this roster, reshaping this roster. Is it going to win a national championship? Probably not. Can it compete for an ACC title in a second weekend in the NCAA tournament? I think that's the case. I don't think any of that would have been possible without Luka Bogavac being on this roster. And so, does this get me even more excited? No, because I'm always excited for Carolina basketball. What this does do, though, is kind of rest some of the concerns I was going to have entering the season, where I look at this roster and it's not perfect. There isn't such a thing as a perfect roster, NIL, revenue sharing, transfer portal world, but this is a roster that I think is suited to set Hubert Davis up to give us the best firm evaluation of him as Carolina's head coach. And I think that's the main goal, the main objective of this year, is finding out what Carolina has sitting on its bench. You can answer that question a lot more clearly with Luka Bogavac on the floor, as opposed to sitting on the bench in street clothes, being deemed ineligible by the NCAA.
Yeah, I mean, that plateau that we talked about earlier, I mean, it grows when you've got a guy like Luka on the team as opposed to if you don't. I mean, you talked about it, man. If they don't have him on the team, I mean, you're rolling with Jonathan Powell at that position. And while Jonathan Powell, I think, is a little bit better than maybe some people realize, he's a really good shooter. I think he's a much better defender than a lot of people will give him credit for. I mean, he's not exactly a guy that I think is going to blow you away at that position. And then if you say, well, okay, we don't want that, well, you could roll with an incredibly big lineup. And we had talked about that possibly being a way that Carolina goes with Henry Vasar at the 5, Jaren Stevenson at the 4 or at the 3, or Caleb Wilson at the 4 or the 3. And we said it. Look, Caleb Wilson is a guy that his back to the basket game is way too good to not have at the 4 spot. And so now, all these conversations about what do you do if Luka isn't here? And I mean, I guess you still have to have some of those conversations. What do you do if he doesn't get cleared by the NCAA? But to me, I don't think that's even really a conversation at this point. I think most people believe that they've gotten past the biggest hurdle like we talked about, and now they're going to be moving towards getting him on the court. I think if they do, then, Carolina's got a real chance to compete for one of those top 3 spots in the ACC. I don't think that's crazy, because especially if you said, if he's giving us numbers that are similar to the numbers that he produced this past year, which, I mean, look, he's playing in a professional league. That professional league, I think, is good. Do I think it's the level of athlete that you see in college basketball? I don't. I do think that a lot of those guys, I mean, you look at some of the stars in those leagues, those are guys that used to play in college basketball. And a lot of them played at UNC Greensboro. Texas Arlington was one of the guys. I think that was Eric Neal, who's actually his teammate on SC Derby. Some of those guys, I mean, they're okay. Clearly, they've done some decent things to stick around for as long as they have. And I mentioned Johan Berenger being in that league, but he's also very young. I think this will be a little bit of a step up. I don't necessarily look at this as, this is no doubt going to work. He's going to put up big numbers type of pickup. But I do think this is one that can be very successful for Carolina this year, and he can be a big contributor for the team as they move along. Now the question to me is, does he have enough time to get acclimated to things to be able to start in the first game of the season? Like, what does he look like? I think one thing that'll be really interesting to see is when they play that exhibition against BYU, what does he look like? How does the communication look between him and his teammates? Because here's the thing, not only do you have to work over the lack of time that you've been together, you're also working through a language barrier as well. So we'll see how quickly that communication really develops between him and his teammates. But if it does, and, he's played with guys that are from the U.S. before, so maybe it isn't really that much of an issue. Maybe the language barrier isn't that thick. Then I think he'll be perfectly fine and he'll get acclimated quickly. But then the thing is, how quickly is he picking up what the coaching staff is wanting him to pick up? So we're entering a really interesting time here over these next few weeks, to about a month with Luka Bogavac.
Yeah, I'd be pretty surprised if he's not starting for Carolina. Heck, when they go to BYU for the exhibition, when they host the exhibition or the season opener, you would have loved to have him on campus for the summer for the workout and the practice sessions. But the coaches will tell you they're not even doing full install stuff. It's pretty much basic as you're not on the court long together. And you got to remember, they start practicing in 6 weeks. Like, they practice at the end of September as opposed to the middle of October. Plenty of time for a 21-year-old who's been playing in the professional league, I think, to acclimate himself to Carolina, to Hubert Davis, to his new teammates, and establish himself as one of the primary focal points of Carolina's offensive attack. That's the baseline expectation. And I think, from there, the ceiling is the roof for him. The sky is the limit. We'll see where he ultimately, to tie back into the pod thought of the day, where he plateaus. Most important thing is Luka Doncic is no longer the best, the most important Luka in basketball in North America. That is now Luka Bogavac. This is the Luka that if LeBron had on his roster, he would be competing for NBA titles with the Los Angeles Lakers, because Luka Bogavac is going to bring an ACC banner, wins over Duke, wins over State, and hopefully maybe a Final Four during his time in Chapel Hill. With that being said, we'll do something that we don't do a lot of on the pod, but when it's warranted, we do it. And that means we're going to talk about a national college basketball discussion. NCAA tournament expansion has been something that's been on the table for quite some time. And it felt inevitable. And if we're being honest, it still is inevitable, but it's not going to happen for next year, for the 2026 tournament. Dan Gavitt, who heads up the stuff for the NCAA tournament, he's the SVP of the NCAA, released this statement on Monday, quote, "Expanding the tournament fields is no longer being contemplated for the 2026 men's and women's basketball championships. However, the committee will continue conversations on whether to recommend expanding to 72 or 76 teams in advance of the 2027 championships," end quote. So we will remain a tournament of 68. That means the fine folks at the field of 68 don't have to change the name of their business for at least another year. And while it's being tabled, this is not going away. And when we're sitting here this time next year, we'll probably be talking about the tournament being expanded, I believe, all the way to 76 teams. I think they won't even bother going all the way or just to 72. It's going to surprise you guys. I am not in favor of expansion. I think the 68 team tournament is the perfect number, the perfect allotment. When the tournament expanded back in 2011 from 64 to 68, I did not think that it was warranted then. The first four has proven to work. It does generate, I think, interest earlier in the week of the first weekend of the tournament. And you look at some of the legendary runs that you have seen from teams going from the first four to the Final Four, from the first four to the second weekend, or like in Carolina's case this past year, from the first four to the round of 64. I do think it has ultimately been a success. I don't think expanding to 72 to 76 to put middle-of-the-road SEC or Big Ten teams in the tournament is something that we need to explore. My argument has been if they expand the field and, the last 8 teams that get into the field or the teams that you see play in the play-in games or literally the last handful of teams get selected and the schools from one bid leagues get to go to a legitimate NCAA tournament site, I think I can stomach that because I have a problem seeing these 16 seeds have to play in Dayton. The Dayton game should be all the 11 seeds, all the 12 seeds, whichever, however they want to seed line the play-in games, as opposed to making teams that won their conference tournament then have to go win another game before they really get a full NCAA tournament experience. Short story short, Monday was a small victory for college basketball fans in the short term. In the long term, I do feel like this will be expanded. What did you think of the NCAA postponing expansion for at least one more season?
I loved it. I love the fact that they had to postpone it. And no, it's not the NCAA making the choice to do it. It's because they just ran out of time. And that's great. I think that's amazing because they dragged their feet on more stuff than just about anybody, and they did it again, and it cost them more money. The thing is that that's going to be the argument for expanding the tournament. It's more money. It generates more interest because people are going to watch these games no matter what. This is the thing. We're sitting here complaining about this. Do you think that we are not going to watch those games? We'll be tuned in. We'll be tuned in and watching those games.
I would argue that I don't think it's generating the interest earlier in the event unless you're like myself, which is a college basketball diehard. I mean, most people do not start watching the tournament until Thursday at noon when the first round of 64 game does tip off. I think with the way that they would want to table it and set it up for TV purposes, I think Tuesday, Wednesday become Thursday and Friday, where you have basically a site host all 4 games. I think Dayton would be the perfect site for that, but I think 4 is a better number as opposed to hosting 8. The bigger issue is that, it would devalue the regular season more than expansion in any other sport. We've seen the NFL expand its playoffs, the regular season not devalued. We've seen baseball expand its playoffs. The regular season no longer was not devalued. Same thing for the NBA, college football. They've expanded their postseason, and they went from 2 to 4 to 12, and now we might go all the way to big as 16, but it's not devaluing the regular season. You could argue for college football, it is enhancing the regular season because now there are certain games in October and November that mean more than they did back in the 2-team or the 4-team playoff era. That's not the same case for college basketball. It's just not, because now the bubble is going to be significantly larger. And if we're being honest, how many people do what I did this past year, which watched every bubble game there was the last month of the season? There aren't many. So expanding the bubble is not going to generate interest. It's going to make people think, well, these games don't really matter because even if they lose this game, they can back themselves into the NCAA tournament anyway. Like, college basketball would actually benefit from downsizing and going back to a 64-team tournament, or if we want to go back to the 48-team model to increase intensity and awareness. They're not going to do that. And so that's the thing, is that there's no real on-court benefit to them expanding the tournament. You're just going to put more middle-of-the-road teams in as opposed to deserving mid-majors. It's not going to generate more interest in the sport. And the reason why they didn't expand isn't necessarily from a lack of they ran out of time. They don't have the money. They don't have the funding to expand. If the money and the funding was there, this would have been passed without a second thought. But that money, that funding is not there right now. Once they get that, expansion will be knocking on our door in a big way.
Yeah, and that'll be here next year. I mean, let's just be honest with ourselves here. There is no way that this does not pass by next season. But you brought up the best point, and the one that I'm making when it comes to this. Guys, they are not putting teams like Indiana State from a couple of years ago with Robbie Avila. They're not putting that team in the NCAA tournament. They're not putting Drake from a few years ago in the NCAA tournament, a team that gets left out that had an amazing regular season. They're not putting those teams in. They're going to put a Villanova team that is 18-14. They're going to put that team in the NCAA tournament. They're going to put some of these teams in the SEC that, finish with below 500 records. You'll have teams that finish with 6-12 records in conference play that will make the NCAA tournament.
It's already happened. Look at Oklahoma this past year.
Is that really what you want, or more teams like that don't even win a third of their conference games getting into the NCAA tournament? That should not be what you're looking for. And that's, to me, the best argument. And you could say, well, what do you guys really know about that? We know the bubble pretty well. We've come to learn the bubble, unfortunately, pretty well over these last few years. And I, for one, think that some of the teams that could possibly get in don't deserve to get in the NCAA tournament. We've talked about it for years that some of these teams don't deserve to make it. Look at the arguments that we had this year with the teams that made it, even involving Carolina. If the tournament was expanded, Carolina would have been in easily, and there would have been absolutely no conversation about whether or not they should be in the NCAA tournament. You're going to have more and more teams that are going to have questionable resumes. Like, this is my plea to the people that are out there throughout the rest of the country. You think it's bad that Carolina had the record in quad one that they had? That'll become a normal thing, that teams like that will make it into the NCAA tournament with ease. There will be teams that don't even have a quad one victory that will make it into the NCAA tournament if you continue to expand this field. And that, I think, is where things get a little too crazy. You can question the quad system all you want. I don't think it's the best way to decide who gets into the NCAA tournament either. But at the same time, I mean, yeah, there needs to be some awareness. Do these teams deserve to play for a national championship when it's all said and done? They don't. And I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. If they expand this to 76 teams, what will happen is that they will add 4 more at-large teams, but they will make sure that there are more 16 seeds that have to play in the first round in Dayton. They're going to do that. If they expand to 76, that's what's going to end up happening. So I think you're 100% right about that too. If you make the NCAA tournament, if you get an automatic bid, that automatic bid should be an automatic bid into the tournament field. And people will say, well, those teams really aren't that good. Would we really want to see those teams in there? Yes, they deserve to be in there more than the teams that didn't win their conference. So I think that should be how they do it if they do end up expanding it. But we know this is not what's going to happen. They're not going to listen to us. They're going to do whatever they want. And more of these mid-major conferences are going to continue to feel like they are getting pressed out of college basketball, that they don't want them necessarily to be involved with the NCAA tournament. And it's going to get us closer and closer to that split between the power conferences that we think eventually is coming somewhere down the line. We all talk about it with football, but it's moves like this that also start to show you some of those cracks in basketball as well.
Yeah, and there was some other news that came down really like in the weeds stuff about how much power the power conference conferences now have when it comes to decision making and their influence. They're taking more and more away from the group of 5 conferences, and then the one bid leagues. And so college basketball, the NCAA tournament, from its time its inception through all of its expansion to 64 to 65 to 68 teams worked, and it was justified. The product stayed great. The interest stayed great. You had the arrival of television in the 80s that made March Madness. Now what we know is the best 3-week sporting events we have in the United States. And while it kind of seems maybe folly to think that if you just go to 72 or 76, that it will ruin that, but it's not going to have the benefit that the extra dollars are going to generate. And so just leave it alone. It's, even once you added the first 4, the bracket still fits on a sheet of paper and it looks right. And it's beautiful. And it's something that we all look forward to as sports fans every year is Selection Sunday, and seeing that bracket unveiled, filling out our bracket over the next couple of days. And so I'm glad we got one more year of 68 because that's probably as long as we have is just one more. And I do think when we're talking about this, probably this time next year, we'll be sitting here talking about, there being 76 teams being included in the NCAA tournament, which for a coach like Steve Forbes at Wake Forest, I bet you he'd love to see tournament expansion because his job wouldn't be on the hot seat. Probably the same thing for Will Wade when he under-delivers at NC State. But at Carolina, just making what's happened the last 3 of the 4 years isn't good enough. Like, the fact that we've gotten so comfortable talking about the bubble is not something that I enjoy boasting about. Like, I enjoy watching college basketball, don't get me wrong. But I'd much rather be watching the top 10 matchups on a nightly basis as opposed to losing sleep watching bubble matchups to see where my team stacks up against bubble teams as we got closer and closer to Selection Sunday. And you're right, in a 76-team field, Carolina gets in with a breeze. It's not even a debate them being included. And I thought Carolina deserved to be in the tournament this past year. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Carolina fan. 2 years ago when they missed it, I sat right on this podcast and said they didn't deserve to be there. So there was nothing to be upset about. But when you look at this, you're not putting better teams on the floor. You're not bettering the competition. You're not generating interest. You're not generating ratings. You're just generating revenue. And at some point, we got to quit chasing money when it's hurting the product on the court that makes the money to begin with. But for now, we'll celebrate the 68-team tournament and maybe appreciate it more than we usually do when we get to 2026 March Madness. With that, that is going to wrap up this edition of the Four Corners Podcast. We want to thank everyone for being here live with us on a Tuesday night, on a late Tuesday night. But when we got the news that we got, it was a no-brainer for us to get on here and talk about it at least for 35 to 40 minutes. In the meantime, we will direct you guys to the website, HeelToughBlog.com, where the Luka Bogavac news has already been written about. You can find it right there at the top of the page when you go to HeelToughBlog.com. Any more news and notes around Carolina basketball, you know that I or Anthony will have you covered. Same thing with Carolina football, full-blown preseason mode for that side of the website. Position previews are going out in a big way. The entire offensive side of the ball has been taken care of. We've now turned our attention to the defensive side. Make sure you go to the website to get all those position previews ahead of the upcoming season. Any recruiting, transfer portal stuff, Anthony will have you covered with that information as well. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform, simply search the Four Corners Podcast and we will pop up. There, we encourage you to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball off season. Still to come this week. It's going to be a busy week for the pod here in early August. We got the What If series. We get into the 1970s, the biggest what ifs around Carolina basketball from that decade. And we still got to review what the Field of 68 guys said about Carolina's offseason. Some like it, some love it. We'll react to that as well. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. That way you don't miss those editions of the show later this week. With that, guys, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. Want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.